and welcome to What It Takes, where each week we talk to leaders and changemakers to learn about the organizations and programs that help improve our communities. Unless you've been living under a rock, you know that in recent years, some have called the security of our elections into question, often without much evidence to support their claims. My guest today is here to help us demystify the election process and explain the steps that are taken before, during, and after the polls are open to ensure the accuracy and security of the election process. My guest is Andrew Cochran, Director of Elections and General Registrar for Roanoke City, who's joining us during his absolute busiest time of year as he prepares for an upcoming midterm election. I want to thank you so much for coming, Andrew.
Thank you for having me.
I always like to start, before we start talking about elections and everything else, just tell me about your path to becoming, in charge of our local elections.
My path was not a direct one, but prior to being in the elections arena, I worked for 18 years in the financial services industry. And I was on the side that did training and communications and project management and that kind of thing. So all those skills transferred very nicely when I got into the work that I'm doing now.
Great. And I'm going to just say up front, I have known Mr. Cochran for a little while as the person who runs our elections because I signed up to be an officer of election a few years ago and really got a firsthand look at what you have to do to train people, to prepare them and everything else. Let's start sort of at the beginning, because before you can vote, you have to register to vote.
Yes.
How do people do that, and are there multiple paths to it?
There are multiple paths to do that. The deadline to register to vote is always 22 days before election, so it's 3 weeks plus the Monday is the deadline to register. Options have expanded over the years. You can do the old-fashioned paper application, mail it in, or come into the office. You can do it through the DMV portal. You can do it through the DMV in person. You can go to the Department of Elections website, elections.virginia.gov, and do that there through the citizen portal. So lots of ways to accomplish that.
You mentioned the DMV, and we talked about it a little bit before we rolled. Virginia is one of those states that does allow people to, you can register very easily when you visit the DMV. There's been some reporting around some delays that happen with some voter registration. How has that affected what you're doing, and will everybody who's registered in your area anyway be ready to go on election day?
It was a big disruption. We had about 1,400 records that dated back to May. We were just made aware of last week. But rest assured, all of those will be processed probably by this afternoon or maybe in the morning. But anyone needing to vote will be registered in plenty of time.
I just want to remind viewers, when he says we'll be ready in the morning, we're taping this ahead of time. So by the time election day comes, you should be in good shape. What were your thoughts when you said you were made aware of these? I can only imagine that was a little stressful.
It was a little stressful, but we don't linger on the emotional part. We jump right into action planning to get things done. And so we had a good plan, and it's paid off.
When people register, I know, again, as somebody who's been in a local precinct several times for your organization, what are some things that can trip you up as when you're registering that can cause problems when you do show up to vote?
Okay, so the biggest thing is that people don't keep their registration current. So you think you're registered one time and you're good for life. As long as you don't move, that's pretty much true, as long as your address has not changed. But if you think about the way precincts are assigned, they're assigned by streets. So if you have moved outside of your precinct, that creates an issue that we have to work through together. So that's probably the biggest thing on election day that slows people down just a little bit.
Now, how far in advance of an election do you need to know that someone has moved?
The close of books is 22 days before election.
For that as well, so
yes,
for changing?
For every single election, it's 22 days before.
Okay, and I have seen it happen where somebody shows up to a precinct
yes.
and they're either in the wrong place and because they're registered in another precinct, or they're in the right place but their address doesn't match.
Yes.
What happens to somebody when they walk into the poll and speak to the officer of election and the person says, there's something not quite right?
Okay, so we have a book that we work through. There are steps that we review based on when you moved and where you moved. So bottom line, rest assured, our single goal that we all share is to enable any qualified voter to be able to vote. So if you're in the wrong precinct, we're going to direct you to the correct precinct. We have a little slip of paper that we can print out with the map and directions of your correct polling location. All kinds of scenarios, but we will help you. We are prepared to work through every one of those with every single voter.
Now, all of when those of us who work at the polls and you all, you know, there are computers that people that the officers of election use and that are used. Whenever anybody hears about computers, they think about hacking or somebody getting in on the internet to access those computers. What kind of safeguards, I guess, are in place to make sure that that doesn't happen here?
In Virginia, we have significant numbers and layers of safeguards. I'm very proud about how seriously Virginia has taken this. We have all kinds of layers of encryption. It has gotten very, very complex in the last couple of years even. All of our software for our voting machines has been updated. The thumb drives that we use to transfer data are encrypted. We have a special computer that does not touch anything else. It's Linux-based. It's provided by the Department of Homeland Security to be sure that everything is perfectly clean to their specifications. So we have lots of things around that type of security. We also take physical security very seriously. Our sheriff's deputies are the ones that deliver and retrieve voting equipment. So we take every aspect of that very seriously.
Yeah, and I can say again, it's a big part of the training. You know, we're told what to touch, what not to touch, what we can do, what we can't do, and there's also a paper record in Virginia, right? This is not a situation where it's just a digital.
That is correct. So we have the paper copy, which is the one the voter marked, and that is imaged front and back in 2 different places in the voting equipment. So there are backups of all of that.
You've talked about the deadlines for registration and where you can do it. Is there a preferred method for you all? Is there something you wish people would do more of and less of another method, or not?
I think whatever is most convenient for the voter is what we're happy with. So.
Absentee ballots have grown across the country in recent years. Where does Virginia fit in terms of like what the Commonwealth allows for people to vote without physically going to the polls or to your office?
Okay, so prior to the last presidential election, prior to 2020, there were significant hoops you had to jump through. You had to qualify to meet a specific criteria why you had to absentee vote and could not vote on election day. So beginning with the November 2020 election, those basically went away. Anybody was allowed to vote early in person. Anybody who was registered was also allowed to vote in person or get a vote by mail ballot. So vote by mail has become very, very popular, and as has early voting in person.
Have we noticed, and this may be outside of your area of expertise, but when those changes were made to make it easier for people to either vote when it was more convenient to them or to vote absentee through the mail, do we know whether that increased voter participation in America?
It certainly increased voter participation a lot. The first year, November 2020, that election cycle, voters embraced that with glee. It was just overwhelming. In our office alone, before Election Day, we had 18,000 people vote in person, which is tremendous. 65% of the people who voted in the 2020 November election voted before Election Day.
I know I have the last couple times because I was working the polls that day, so it was convenient. But my 91-year-old mom, who is perfectly capable of getting around and everything, it's a lot easier for her to come to your office than to go to a school where there's a bunch of steps or wherever her polling place is.
And a little secret, it's a lot faster.
It is very quick. You pull up and again, even now, people with disabilities, people who are if walking is difficult, tell me about the options for those folks on Election Day. If it's difficult for somebody and they're worried that they're not going to be able to walk the distance it might take, what can somebody do?
So we take Americans with disabilities very, very seriously. We have all kinds of things in place to help every single one of them. So even during early voting, we have what's called curbside voting. If you're unable to walk, you can just pull up through the curbside lane. They will come to you. You just stay in your car. They will take your credentials, credential your right to vote, get your ballot to you. You mark it in your car. We will take it into the scanner, and you can wait to be sure that it was accepted appropriately. And without ever leaving your car, that's a good option. Every one of our 20 precincts in Roanoke City has curbside voting on election day as well. There are other types of disabilities that people have. People have disabilities. I always say, if you're not able to hold and mark a ballot with a pen, we have a device for you. So that would be blind people, that could be somebody with a neurological disorder that could not hold a pen, low vision impairment as well. We have a machine that all of those people can use to mark a ballot that will print a ballot for them.
And I'll say, I mean, I know that's a significant investment to have that technology, and it doesn't get used that often, at least in the precincts where I've worked, but when it is, the people are very, very
Yes.
Thankful about that. You mentioned, as we were talking before the show, that the manual for Virginia elections has changed over time. What are some of the biggest changes you've seen in your career? And I don't even know how long you've been doing what you've been doing, but what are some of the big changes you've seen, and how tricky is it to keep up with that every election cycle?
When I first started a number of years ago, all of the applications, most of the applications were handwritten applications. Some came from the DMV, but they were all paper-based. And so now the majority of those applications are electronic. You do that online or you go to the DMV, we get that electronically. So that has been a big change. The other biggest change is the one I've already mentioned about the 2020 election, where we have opened voting for early voting in person and vote by mail for people. That has been very popular, and a lot of people have taken advantage of that.
One thing that sometimes when people are complaining about election security or whatever, they'll say, well, what's to stop somebody from voting twice? Maybe you vote absentee and then you show up at your poll. What's to stop somebody from voting twice?
We have all kinds of security measures in place. I can't talk about all of them, but there are measures in place to catch that. So I'll give you an innocent example of that may come to people's minds. So some people get a ballot by the mail. They've requested one, they either didn't get it, they lost it, the dog ate it, whatever. They call us and we will reissue that ballot. So we have sent that person 2 ballots. It is only going to accept the first one that comes back. We have unique security identifiers on each of those ballot envelopes, and we can only accept one. So people only vote once in Virginia.
And if someone shows up to the polls and they go up to the officer of election, what happens if maybe they already sent that in?
If they have already sent that, they have an option, and I won't trouble you with the details right now, but there are processes in place to deal with that as well.
Tell me about, one of the things I was impressed with as a new officer of election was the fact that while I had to know, the manual, and you are very good about giving us a short list as well, like here's how the quick things, is the role of the chief. Who is a precinct chief, and what is their role?
So a precinct chief is basically the orchestra conductor. They are the one organizing the precinct to receive voters, because there are a number of different functions there, and it means assigning the right election officer to do the various tasks throughout the day and to solve any issues or problems that sometimes come up.
I responded to a plea. I read a newspaper article, and that's how I became a officer of election. I saw that you were saying, we really need help. How important are those officers of election? What do you have to do to become one if somebody's watching and they're like, I could take a day every few years to do something like that? What's required?
Well, I always tell people it takes a village to raise a child. It takes an army to have an election. So on election day, we have about 200 people employed in that execution of an election. So you have to have some electronic skills. You have to be comfortable with a keyboard. Anyone who is capable of sitting through the training, new officers go through 6 hours of training. It's not something we take lightly. And as long as you're capable of working that very long day and committing to that, that is the important thing for us.
And that long day, I was surprised the first time I probably didn't pay good attention in the training, but now we will see you at what time in the morning and how late are you going to be there in the evening?
Yeah, 5 o'clock to, the polls close at 7, so usually they're out of there about 8:30 or 9.
So tell me about what the situations are like in the precincts. I've noticed that there's a lot of fun. There's often food and it's a long day. So, what do you hear from your folks who work in the precincts about why they keep coming back?
Well, I think they love it. That's why they keep coming back, and they have a true sense of purpose and wanting to help facilitate that process. They do enjoy the food. That's a big element. I can't deny that. I always joke with everybody in training and saying, remember, your samples of your food have to be in this office by Monday for us to approve. Nobody ever takes me up on that. But I think the other reason that people enjoy it is first time somebody works an election, they are seeing the underbelly of the election workings. If you've never worked an election, you go in, your voting experience is about 2 minutes in the polling location. That's all you see. When you work a whole day and you get training, you have a very, very different understanding of the election process and how seriously we take every element of that and how much is involved in that. So people have a tremendous respect for that process after working.
Yeah, it's everything from where do you put the signs directing people to it,
Yes.
and then those have to all be collected at the end of the day and all of that. If someone is watching this and they think, oh, I could do that, how do they reach out? And I know, keeping in mind that this goes to a much larger area than just
Sure.
your expertise area, but how does somebody get involved?
So on the Department of Elections website, there is a link where you can do that. For us in Roanoke City, you can just send an email to registrar@roanokeva.gov, and we will get back to you if you provide your contact information. If you're outside of Roanoke City, you can just call the Director of Elections in your locality, and they will assist you with that process.
The other thing that happens a lot is that people come up to you while you're standing by the voting machine or taking their information. They say, thank you for volunteering. Thank you for your service. And I always make a point of saying, you're welcome. And while the pay isn't, going to send anybody over the moon, it is a paid position, right? How does that work?
They are not volunteers. It is a paid position. And because of that, there's a lot of learning and training that goes into that process. As I mentioned, new election officers go through 6 hours of training. They have to know a lot, and the lot they have to know has expanded greatly over the years. So,
COVID, a lot of things changed for the 2020 election. They were already going to change.
yes.
How did that impact how you made sure that we conducted a safe election in addition to a secure election?
The safety was at the top of our list for people. One of the challenges was we knew what we needed to have in order to have a safe election for early voting as well as election day, having the shields and all kinds of sanitary products and gloves, et cetera. The trouble was with the global supply chain interrupted, it was very difficult to get those things, but we made it happen. And those are relaxed now. So we had those all for all the precincts, and fortunately some of that is going away a little bit now.
One of the things I was impressed with was, I believe it's the Medical Corps of Virginia, who
Yes.
actually came in and talk about their role.
They were really great. That was a service. These people do volunteer. They have extensive training, and they were very, very helpful in executing the protocols that we needed to keep our voters safe. And we continue to thank them. We will continue to use them as they're available.
What are they doing for you?
They're coming in, and of course their training is extensive in protocols for keeping things sanitized and things. They would help with that. They can't do anything election related, but they were very helpful in keeping the place clean and sanitized and those kinds of things.
Yeah, they were collecting pens and wiping down
Yes.
pens, and
Yes.
they were reminding us to keep our masks on and all of that. You see, there are no mask requirements for voters or workers anymore, is that?
No. We have them available. They're not required, but if anybody forgot one and wants one, we will offer it to you.
Will there still be plexiglass partitions between the poll worker, the election officers, and the public?
There will be through 2022, and we'll evaluate next year in 2023.
Gosh, I mean, all the work that went into providing all of that, it seems to have all that last only a few years. I guess you'll then have to store it in hopes that it never gets used again. We've talked a lot about officers of election because I'm interested in that, but you have quite an extensive staff. Tell me who works for you and works with you. I know they don't just work for you, but what's required on the staffing end, on your end, to make sure that we have smooth elections?
Yeah. Well, many years ago when I first started this, I thought little elves just came in the night before and popped everything up, and that was all there was to it. And it's a year-round process. So the election part of that is about a 10 to 12 week heavy-duty preparation for the election. But every single business day of the year, we are doing maintaining voter rolls. So that's very, very extensive. We have what we call list maintenance, which involves updating people's addresses when they do a new registration application. When people die or convicted of a felony or whatever, we have to cancel those. People move into our locality, out of our locality, into the state, out of the state. So that is a lot of transactions and a lot of details to keep track of. Going into the 2020 presidential election that year, we have 65,000 voters, but that year we did over 70,000 transactions to keep those voter rolls clean and accurate.
And I'm sure that early voting changed a lot of what you had to do, because now you have to have people there every day, and that's not people like me who come and show up every couple of years.
That radically changed our model and our budget because we have to staff. We have an election every single day. I mean, we have to staff for a real election every single day.
What do you wish people knew about the work you do and elections in general?
I wish people knew how very hard we worked and how many long hours we worked, the weekends that we put in, and how committed we are to conducting fair and honest elections. We've taken oaths to that effect, but we take that to heart. We are all about fair and honest elections and doing things by the Code of Virginia. It's a lot, but every single person, I'm proud to say, in our office is very committed to that.
I continue to be struck about, the civility of an election, right? It is the birthday every year of our democracy. But I will say that in the last election, I personally experienced, and I saw others experience, a little bit of hostility from voters. What are you telling your employees and your officers' election about what to do if someone tries to make it personal?
Yeah. So we do offer coaching in the training about how to deal with those types of situations, which in the scheme of things are not
very rare, but they happen.
But they do happen. I think when they happen, it's very explosive sometimes, and that's disarming to people. A lot of the heart of that is misinformation that people have gathered online or wherever they've gotten it. It simply is not true. And we try to educate people about the reality of the work that we do and the equipment that we have as best we can.
As part of that, when you're educating somebody, I was thinking as I prepared for this of the Schoolhouse Rock, I'm just a bill and it follows the bill through. What's the path of the ballot? Where does it start? Where does it end?
That's a very good question. So we have to have an application from the voter. We don't send ballots out unless the voter has actually requested that. The application has to be complete. They have to be registered appropriately. When the time comes, we send out ballots as soon as we get them to those voters by mail. They have to mark their ballot. They have to have a witness. They put it in an envelope B, which is certifying that they are that voter, and et cetera, et cetera. All that information on there has to be correct. When you receive it back, we have teams of people who are trained in reviewing those ballots for accuracy to be sure that, yes, this is that person, that everything is in order, that all the security around that individual ballot is correct. So then the envelope B is opened. They are scanned the day that they are reviewed. We cannot tabulate votes until election night at 7 p.m. So while we're scanning ballots, that's called pre-processing, we do not tabulate anything until election night.
So you don't know who's ahead or who's behind or anything else?
That's the reason for that. So.
And as we've alluded to several times, election security is an issue. I mean, I don't remember hearing about it nearly this much until recent history. Our election is our local elections, our elections in Virginia secure, and how confident are you in that?
I am 1000% confident. I'm extremely secure in that knowledge. We have all kinds of training. We have all kinds of things that change to make things safer, and we implement those as quickly as those opportunities come up. So I'm not aware of any incidents in the state to the contrary.
There has been escalating rhetoric, and you've talked about how you deal with that. Do you have any concerns about the safety and security of polling places in terms of just making sure everybody stays safe?
That's always a concern. It's not a worry that I have. We have protocols in place that most people are not aware of. So our polling locations are very safe.
Okay. Well, the last thing I'll ask is would you just tell us again, how do people find out more, both in Roanoke and other places about?
So across the Commonwealth, if you're not in Roanoke City, elections.virginia.gov. Go to the citizen portal. That will give you all kinds of information to either register, or you can change your address there. You can even look yourself up and see every election you've ever voted in is out there, which is kind of cool for people. If you're in Roanoke, more information in Roanoke City is roanokeva.gov/registrar.
All right. Well, Andrew, always a pleasure to see you. I look forward to seeing you at the next training that I attend. I hope this program has helped clarify any questions or concerns you had about elections. And again, I would just encourage you to reach out to your local office in your locality with more questions. For What It Takes, I'm Tom Landon.